Thank you so much for the question, and thank you, Terry, for giving me this opportunity to speak to such an important think tank on this very important issue. The just green transition discussion that we are taking up in the development working group is from the perspective of looking at the development dimension of the just green transition. So, as some of you know, the just transition is one aspect which has been under discussion in the international discourse, which talks about the fact that while we are transitioning, we must take care of the social aspect of the transitions. Green transition, on the other hand, is the energy side of it. But what we are saying is that the just green transitions, when combined, also have a transnational, international dimension, especially on development. So, for example, if a climate policy in a country, in a big country or a big region has a spillover impact on the development agenda of another country, this is something that the G20 must discuss and see that we can initiate a discussion and feed into the discussion of responsible climate policies which aid sustainable development goals everywhere around the world. They go beyond the principle of do no harm, but they actually do better and be more proactive in terms of supporting the development agenda. I think it is possible if we look at it from the perspective of the international enabling environment being adaptive, proactive and responsive to the developing country needs. Thank you for this question again. The idea that we have is that we need to power green development with development at its core, but something that also takes into account the climate and development goals together in an integrated manner, and that's how we are terming it as green development. But since it's so cross-cutting and all-encompassing, it needs to be fed with the inputs and the outcomes coming from the different working groups. So the things, the 5 pillars that you've listed out, climate finance coming from finance track as well as the development working group, the SDG action plan coming from the development working group, life high level principles coming from the development working group, as well as working with climate sustainability, and energy transition coming from energy transition working group, circular economy as well. So I think all these deliverables, we partnered with specific actions that we are really proposing that the G20 takes, have the potential of fueling green development and also setting a narrative for green development in the developing countries for the next decade and more than that. So I think what we really want to do is to demonstrate that the developing countries indeed are seized of both these agendas in an integrated manner. And given the task that they have at hand, where they have to develop at a time where the world is very uncertain, and they also have to develop while decarbonizing at the same time. Something like that has never happened before in the past. So I think what we are really trying to do is bring out the green development discussions in a political sense. So the Green Development Pact will be is aimed to be a pact at the leaders level of a certain narrative, actions and resources mobilized through the work of the different working groups for the next several years. So our specific proposals would be specific actions, mobilization of resources, and generating a political momentum for looking at these agendas in an integrated manner through the work of the G20 and beyond, especially the international organizations. Thank you very much. I think this question is extremely important because it is very visionary for the Prime Minister to launch life in a manner that takes the climate action, the climate agenda discussions right to the individual level and makes individuals a part of our discussions and our efforts. And I think this is extremely important because the climate discussion so far in the G20 and other international organizations have been mostly about reducing energy sources, reducing emissions and things like that. But it is a very visionary approach of the Prime Minister to take an all stakeholder approach right from the individual, because once we start focusing on the individual, we will have to focus on value chains, supply chains, industry, other stakeholders, and an ecosystem which makes those lifestyles possible and sustainable. So I think while in India we are talking about the discussion on what an individual can do, in G20 we are taking that even further and talking about how an ecosystem can be created and supported and mobilized resources for in the context of making sustainable lifestyles possible. So for example, waste management, for example, transport issues, regenerative urbanization. How is it that we invest on these important areas which have an impact on the sustainable lifestyles and make them feasible in developing countries and developed countries, and make it a core part of our work. So taking that beyond the individual but looking at an ecosystem. So sustainable consumption production is a very, very key component of it, but so is keeping the basic needs of all communities, especially those communities whose consumption is so low that it has to go up for the SDGs to be met, that is zero hunger and poverty alleviation. So it is a very, very fundamental part of our work in the DWG.